You're about to listen to Julie in Genderland. Some of the names and voices you'll hear have been changed to protect the parents who spoke to us and their children. The whole series is available to download now, wherever you get your podcasts. Please listen, like and share. My name is Julie Bindel. I'm a feminist. For 40 years I've been campaigning on the issue of men's violence against women and girls. Now a new threat has turned up in the form of extreme transgender ideology, which says anyone can change sex, and men are women if they say so. And somewhere along the line, children and young people have been caught up in this insanity.
I will not allow them to put a knife into my healthy son's body. Well, it's not quite as healthy as it should be. Now he's been taking that rot, but I will not allow that to happen. I'll fight to the death for it.
In this episode, we hear from parents seeing their older children gain access to hormones and surgery.
To think that he might castrate himself and ruin his body for life, it's just beyond comprehension to me. It's just heartbreaking, actually.
Welcome to Julie in Genderland.
He was at university in the second year and he told me that he'd been to see, I don't know exactly actually whether it was a GP or a psychiatrist or if he'd been referred on at that point, but he'd been to see them because he was struggling with questions around his gender.
This is Hannah.
So that was a complete shock. I can still remember the shock of it, actually, the sort of thinking, I just didn't see it coming. I think there is some sort of confusion around his sexuality that hasn't really been resolved, and wanting to feel seen. I think he got lost. That's my feeling, is he got lost, and this became his answer to being lost, really.
Bolt from the blue from nowhere. Really surreal experience, to be quite frank.
Lucy's son was 17 when he told her he was a woman.
Really sent ramifications through me, my children and my husband off the scale. School in question unquestioningly affirmed him and told us that basically he was 17 and so he was in the driving seat.
People I feel the most angry with are the clinic that he went to and who affirmed him. He had an appointment to go and see a clinical psychologist. I think he had only 2 more before he was offered hormones. And what makes me really angry, really deep down angry with this, is that at this point he'd been offered therapy. He'd been offered intensive therapy for 2 years. And rather than put things on hold and say, go away, have a think, come back, you can come back. There was nothing in their system that allowed that space to say, well, how great, go away, have a think, explore all this. Because even if you do go ahead, you need to have some therapy behind you to cope with it and to think about it. There was none of that. It was all, well, we're going, it felt like almost like they were in competition rather than, the therapist and the clinic working together to help what's best for my son. That's how I feel about it.
Well, so much for a time to think, or just to pause.
I think in the beginning, when he first told me, I was really shocked, and it took a long time to take in what was happening and to try and understand it. And I've never come to terms with it. I still, to this day, think it's a way of him coping with something awful that he can't about himself. I still feel that it's his way of trying to escape something. I think partly because whenever we talk about this, we get into an argument. I can't do it calmly. I can't. And that's why he's in therapy, isn't it? Because he needs someone who can sit and not be frightened and not be absolutely terrified that he's going to do something irreversible to himself, which is still my biggest terror. Obviously, the hormones are irreversible, but they don't feel as violent, I guess, as if he has the operation. To think that he might castrate himself and ruin his body for life is just beyond, it's just beyond comprehension to me. It's just heartbreaking, actually, that he could even consider doing that to himself. It's just awful.
I do absolutely feel blind fury that the NHS is damaging my son as an experiment. I will not allow them to put a knife into my healthy son's body. Well, it's not quite as healthy as it should be. Now he's been taking that rot, but I will not allow that to happen. I know that. I'll fight to the death for it. So my hope is that he wakes up, but in the current environment, I can't see it happening.
Ellie's child, who is autistic, told her out of the blue they wanted to be the opposite sex.
My worry, my concern is that with gender reconstruction, with severe sort of medical interventions, autism does not go away. Autism stays with you. And I do wonder whether these children and young people who are on the spectrum, on autistic spectrum, who are autistic and possibly with ADHD, whether they're actually getting harmed twice by them not getting the attention they deserve with autism and ADHD, which is extremely difficult to get hold of. It's so hard to get any support for these conditions that is actually meaningful and truly helpful. And at the same time, there is a risk that they might be mistreated for something that doesn't cure their autistic traits, and they hope that it will. I have severe PTSD that's off the charts, that I've been told will have an effect on my immune system for 10 years from this event. I have nightmares. I break down in tears most days at one point or another. I am paranoid that my other family members will leave me for accusing me of things I have never done. With a lot of support, I have learned to live with it, and I'm trying to see it from the point of view that is, when I'm crying, for example, that's the indication that I'm alive, that I can find purpose despite this awful situation. But there are triggers everywhere. With PTSD, what you experience is you go to a very normal place with very normal people, for example, friends that you've not met for a while, and they would be talking about university and how their teenagers are about to go, and you just want to cry because that's something that has been sort of taken away from you as a positive event. Same thing about Christmases or birthdays or everything else that involves names and family time that's completely broken is really, really difficult as well. And as a parent, in many ways, you can't win. If you're a affirming parent, you run a risk of your child ending up in a situation that has life-changing consequences that are not good for them. If you're not affirming, you're risking estrangement and major disagreement that is like nothing else. Many parents are in this situation of uncertainty for months and years. Grandparents, of course, are very often affected as well, and the ties with grandparents are often cut by gender questioning young people. So there is quite a big impact.
Parents are just accused constantly of not allowing their children to be who they really are, their authentic self. Always using the analogy of, well, if your child came out as lesbian or gay, would you behave in this way? Well, I assume you wouldn't, because you're not a bigot and you're not narrow-minded and you're not homophobic. So tell me how that plays out within society, amongst, I don't know, parents that wouldn't agree with you, or work colleagues or neighbours, or those that think it's cool to have a trans child.
I don't see the similarities, certainly from this personal experience of having autistic children and being autistic myself. If I were to add these letters to any abbreviations, I would say something like ADHD, TQ 2 plus equals 5. I don't know. Why are we adding it to gay and lesbian when there's nothing, almost nothing similar at all? gay people don't go through any severe medical interventions. They are not. They just have a completely different set of challenges, and it's not helpful to just say trans people are like gay people. They're not. And I think the main difference is that for gay and lesbian people, it's about who they're attracted to. It's about these other people, right? You're attracted to or not attracted to. For trans people, it's very much about themselves, about their understanding of self and what is and isn't comfortable about themselves, not others. So it's completely different set of challenges, and it's not helpful to draw parallels, but those parallels are drawn all the time, and that causes a lot of trouble. A lot of schools are blindsided and misled by these abbreviations and what is implied, just like the rest of the society. From school's point of view, an average teacher would be thinking more or less short term. Most teachers don't know what happens to their students in a year or two because they're moving on to the next cohort. And they are busy all the time. They don't have time to think, oh, well, now that 5 years have passed since so-and-so asked to be called by this name, what's going on now? No one is asking those questions. They're thinking about their lessons today, how to make sure that no one is bullied in school, that they can actually continue to teach a subject as opposed to be dragged into all kinds of conversations that are quite challenging. And from that short-term perspective, it does make sense to agree with whatever the teenager comes up with. It does make, in the short term, life of a teacher easier, and the life of a teacher and the school, really. I think it makes life easier. I totally get where that's coming from. And I think this is where the conflict between the parents and the teachers is so easy to understand, because parents are only dealing with their own children. They can be quirky, they can be challenging in some ways, but you only deal with 1, 2, 3, several children, right? And you know them really, really well for many years. Schools have a different challenge where there are all kinds of students with all kinds of views that sometimes conflict each other. People don't agree with one another and so on, and they have to deal with that. That's a completely different challenge. And I think schools are just doing what's easier for them and not thinking about what will happen to these young people when they grow up, and particularly when they leave school, because that's when it starts to become really dangerous from medical side of things. And schools are not asking themselves those questions.
I want to ask you about organisations such as Stonewall and Mermaids and Gendered Intelligence, and those that go into the schools and develop the trans toolkit, for example, in Brighton schools. What are your thoughts on all of that?
That's something that we still have to figure out as a society. How do we deal with multiple regulatory failures in different organizations and systems? How do we deal with medical malpractice and medical fraud? Because the way justice works, if you're trying to take your doctor to court, it's extremely complicated, and there's very low chance of success, because you're talking to a judge who is a generalist. He's not a medical professional and will never claim to be one, of course, and shouldn't be one, probably. So judges will rely on evidence that's published by medical bodies and medical organizations, and we are circling back to people who have produced something flawed in the first place, and we are using the same information in court to try and understand whether it's true or not, and we are not getting anywhere. I think medical fraud and medical malpractice is really, really difficult in general in society, and not only in the UK, but in the UK in particular. And that is something that is exposed through these kind of gender and sex debates. That's one of the problems. I think the other problems in society, of course, is that we are very polarized. We stopped talking to each other. Certainly generations stopped talking to each other. For somebody who is autistic, there is no need anymore with all the devices and all the information and technology. There is no need to speak to anyone. And if somebody disagrees with you, so what? There's no longer any need to have any discussion and debate. And that's quite a worrying situation as well, where we are not hearing each other. We are not talking to each other. and we need to turn it around and do better.
How it's affected me day to day. I mean, I'm in therapy myself, which I think I can't even describe how that's sort of managed to keep me afloat, really. I think it just feels like you survive, actually. You are surviving. I think my family have struggled with it in that, with this very sort of left-wing Guardian reading socialist family. And I think they all wanted to be kind. And I think they all thought I was this awful mother to my son because I didn't affirm him. I kept questioning whether I was on the wrong side of history, so to speak, as all the cliches say. And I kept wondering if I was getting something wrong, and I wasn't understanding something. And so God, it's been so helpful to have people like yourself around on social media. I mean, that's also helped keep me afloat. I think the fact that there are people also questioning this, that's helped. It's changed who I am enormously, actually, I think.
Our final story is Anna's. In conflict with her ex-partner, but seeing reason for hope.
My eldest, when she was 14 and just after lockdown, decided to tell us that she suddenly thought she was a boy. Both of us were immediately kind of erring on the side of caution and just affirming, just as a lot of parents do, just thinking it's a phase. After the CAS interim report and Suella Braverman's speech about social transition not being a neutral act, I started to feel a bit more kind of not protected, but a bit more as if I could assert my authority as her parent more than I felt able to before. So I started to do that, and I asked my ex to also do that and just reinforce reality. He told me he would, but it was quite obvious that there was something else going on as I look back on it now anyway, because he'd gone into using he, him so easily that he just refused to do it the other way around for her actual, what she actually is.
Do you think that your ex really believes in gender ideology and thinks that your daughter is really a boy and should transition for her own good?
No, I don't think he does. I know that he knows that trans women are men and trans men are women. I think all men know. I think everyone knows. It's just, there's no way that no one can't know, and unless they've been brainwashed like our children have, I don't see how anyone could truly believe that people can be the opposite sex. Her and her friends, they're quite fearful of the men who pretend that they're women. Slowly, she's seeing it for what it is. I can see her seeing it, and she's starting to really just be herself without as much of the ideology at the moment. I don't want to say she's desisting and jinx it or anything, but a lot is changing. As her friends will still call her he and stuff, but there's a lot going on that indicates that she isn't really truly believing in all that anymore. We've been talking a lot more, and she started to want to hear both sides and kind of make her own mind up, and wants to kind of assess all of it.
So going forward, how are you going to work this out? You've got one parent saying, you are a boy, I will affirm you, using opposite sex pronouns for that child, and you're doing something very different. How does that work out between you both?
I honestly don't know. I think unless there's more awareness about reality, about the dangers of it all, the healthcare, so-called healthcare, the lack of safeguarding, all of that, and to make it not cool to be calling yourself trans anymore, and to make it not appealing to children and all of that, I don't think we can really get very far. But we also need the rest of the power and control that men want to impose on women to be acknowledged, and that has to come from men.
And in the meantime, what will you do in the short term? Do you persist in refusing to affirm, or have you ever felt yourself being dragged into that through pressure and just being exhausted with the fight?
I think I'm past the point of caring about what anyone thinks about me calling my daughter my daughter. It's so ridiculous. I'm past it. I just don't care what anyone else thinks. And in my situation, it seems to have been working. I seem to have been able to offer her what she isn't getting from anyone else and any other systems, any other kind of people in her life or organizations or anything. I've offered that, just reality, to try and keep yourself grounded through reality and live your life however you want to, as long as you're just looking after yourself. And I've persisted with that. And I've given her not warnings, but I've instilled that certain actions and things that you might be allowed to do, if you do them, they're not always going to have good outcomes. My ex, I'm not even sure if he's still calling her he or anything, but she seems to have pulled away. And even though everyone else around her is still wanting to call her he and affirm her in any way she had wanted, I haven't had anything from her, and I haven't seen anything from her about pushing it onto other people lately. So I think as long as kids are given time, which obviously Cass has pointed out, then they will start to kind of accept themselves and realize that they can just be whoever they want. Yeah, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I know it's hard for other parents, but I think it's really important, especially if they're in a couple and both of them feel strong enough to just not affirm, to just instill reality. And if we as a society can completely just make it acceptance, just be who you are again, without needing to change yourself and without making gender ideology cool, then our kids will be okay. If we can all stand up to it as parents publicly, to our kids as well, especially, our kids will start to realise they want to rebel, but we can try and get them rebelling in other ways.
You've been listening to Julie in Genderland. The whole series is available to download now, wherever you get your podcasts. Please listen, like, and share.